The mess hall was quieter than usual, save for the soft clinking of plates and the occasional murmur between the team. Caleb, Argos, and Evelyn sat at the center of the long wooden table, their postures tense. Around them, members of the pack stood in casual but calculated positions, each one keeping a watchful eye on their unexpected guests. Gunnar leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. His gaze swept over the trio, assessing them. Clora, seated across from Evelyn, leaned forward slightly, her hazel eyes sharp but not unkind. Darren lounged in his chair at the far end of the table, spinning an empty mug in his hands with a smirk playing on his lips. From behind the counter, Bianca served up steaming plates of pasta and freshly baked bread, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the palpable tension in the room. "You've got two choices," Gunnar said, his voice low but commanding. "You can sit, eat, and talk, or you can sit and talk hungry. Either way, we're going to get some answers." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Argos, then with Caleb, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Argos finally spoke, her tone sharp. "Is this your idea of an interrogation? Feed us, then pry into our heads." Darren chuckled. "It's Bianca's idea of hospitality. Trust me, you'd rather deal with her food than her temper." Bianca shot him a withering look before placing a plate of pasta in front of Argos. "Eat," she said simply, "or don't. Makes no difference to me." The trio hesitated before finally digging into the food, though their movements were cautious. Caleb picked at his plate while his dark eyes darted around the room, no doubt cataloguing exits and possible threats. Evelyn took a sip of water, her posture stiff, while Argos stabbed her fork into a piece of bread with unnecessary force. "We're not here to fight you," Evelyn said finally, breaking the silence. "We're here to understand what the hell is going on, and from what I've seen, you're just as lost as we are." "Lost?" Gunnar raised an eyebrow. "You think we're chasing ghosts?" Argos scoffed. "If you're not, then why are guardians involved? Why drag us here? What's your angle?" Melorian, seated beside Eliana near the far end of the table, spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, measured. "It was not we who dragged you here, but your own missteps. You walked into the territory of a pack with centuries of training. Consider yourselves fortunate they showed restraint." "Restraint?" Caleb muttered, his gaze flicking to Clora. "Didn't feel like it when I was face to face with a wolf the size of a damn truck." Clora smirked faintly but didn't respond. Instead, it was Eliana who addressed the comment, her silver hair catching the light as she leaned forward. "You're here because you've crossed paths with something far larger than you realize. And while we could spend this time trading accusations, I suggest we focus on the real danger." Evelyn's sharp green eyes narrowed. And what danger would that be? Gunnar stepped forward, his presence commanding as he rested his hands on the back of a chair. The Black Dawn. The drug they're spreading. The chaos they're stirring. "We're not interested in your bar or your paranoid boss, Rose. We've got bigger things to handle." Argos's fork paused mid-air. "You think Rose is paranoid?" "She is," Darren said, leaning forward with a smirk. "But she's not wrong to keep her guard up. Question is, are you here because of her paranoia, or because you've got a dog in this fight?" Evelyn hesitated, glancing at Caleb. "We came here because we needed answers. Rose, she doesn't trust you. She thinks you're building something she can't control." "Rose doesn't control us," Clora said firmly. "She's a source of information, not an ally." Argos frowned, her yellow eyes narrowing. "Then what's your angle? Why the wolves, the guardians, the fortress in the middle of nowhere? You're gearing up for something." Gunnar's expression darkened. "We are, but it has nothing to do with you. Until now." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the group. Caleb, who had been quiet for most of the exchange, finally spoke, his voice cautious. "So what? You're saying Rose was wrong?" "She's right about one thing," Gunnar said, his tone cold. "Something big is coming, but if you're here to find out if we're part of it, You're wasting your time. We're trying to stop it." "And Rose?" Argos asked, her sharp tone cutting through the tension. Gunnar shrugged. "Rose is useful when it suits her. But this is bigger than her schemes and fears. If she wants to help, fine. If not, we'll handle it ourselves." Mylarian leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Argos. "Your presence here complicates matters, but it need not escalate them. Tell us why you're here, and what you know of the growing unrest." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her glass. "We're not here for your war. But something's shifting in the shadow realm. We've felt it. Rose has felt it. And from what I've seen tonight, so have you." The air grew heavier as her words lingered, the implications rippling through the room. Gunnar exchanged a glance with Eliana, their silent communications speaking volumes. "Eat," Gunnar finally said, his voice low but firm. "And then we'll talk." As the trio returned to their meals, the pack's watchful eyes never wavered. The questions were far from over, and the answers they sought were more critical than any of them realized. The atmosphere in the mess hall had grown quieter. Plates were mostly pushed aside, replaced with mugs of coffee and the occasional sigh of exhaustion. Evelyn and Argos sat at the far end of the table, still wary but less defensive. Caleb, on the other hand, looked like he was sitting on a bed of nails, his eyes darting around the room like he was waiting for someone to spring a trap. The wolves, sprawled comfortably nearby, kept their golden eyes half closed, though it was clear they were still watching. Alpha lay stretched out near Gunnar's chair, regal and commanding even in his relaxed state. Beta sat close to Ashley, occasionally glancing toward the newcomers with her characteristic mistrust. Omega, however, had a different energy. Omega, the youngest of the wolves, padded into the room carrying his prized possession. A slightly chewed but well-loved stuffed rabbit. Its ears were frayed, the stitching along its belly uneven. But, to Omega, it was perfect. His tail wagged as he trotted confidently over to Caleb, dropping the toy at the man's feet with a proud thump. Caleb froze, staring at the bedraggled toy as though it might explode. He looked around the room, his face a mix of confusion and mild terror. "What am I supposed to do with that?" Argos, biting back a grin, leaned closer and whispered, "I think he wants you to throw it." Caleb blinked, glancing nervously at Omega, who sat back on his haunches, tail wagging furiously, his golden eyes wide with excitement. "You're kidding, right? Is this some kind of test?" Darren, leaning casually against the wall, smirked. "Oh, it's definitely a test. He's evaluating your worthiness. Don't screw it up." Caleb shot him a glare, but Omega nudged the toy closer with his nose, making a soft, impatient wuff. Caleb sighed and picked up the slobbery stuffed rabbit with 2 fingers, holding it at arm's length like it was radioactive. "Fine, but if this gets me eaten, I'm haunting you, Darren." He gave the toy an awkward toss, sending it skittering across the floor. Omega's ears perked up, and with a burst of energy, he bolted after it, his claws clicking against the floor. He retrieved the rabbit with triumphant ease and trotted back, dropping it once again at Caleb's feet. Caleb stared down at the wolf, who was now sitting even straighter, his tail wagging faster. "Oh, come on, I'm not doing this all night." "You better," Clora said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It's better than the alternative. If it were Alpha, he'd be testing how fast you can run." The whole table chuckled, even Evelyn cracking a small smile. Caleb, muttering something under his breath, picked up the toy and threw it again, this time a little farther. Omega darted after it with boundless enthusiasm, his tail wagging even before he reached the toy. "Great," Caleb muttered. "Now I'm a babysitter for a giant chew toy addict." Darren clapped a hand on Caleb's shoulder as he passed by. "Welcome to the pack, buddy." Before Caleb could retort, a sharp, buzzing sound cut through the room. All heads turned toward Eli, who was sitting at the end of the table, her tablet vibrating insistently in her hands. She frowned, swiping at the screen. "What is it?" Gunnar asked, his voice immediately serious. Eli's violet eyes darkened as she scanned the alert. "Sensor breach," she said, her tone tense. "Perimeter wards just picked something up near the northwest boundary. Something, or someone, is out there." The room fell silent. Omega, still holding his rabbit, tilted his head, ears twitching as though he sensed the change in the air. Alpha and Beta both rose to their feet, their postures immediately alert. Gunnar pushed back his chair, his cybernetic fingers flexing as he stood. "All right, team, let's move." The war room buzzed with activity as the pack moved with precision, their sharp, deliberate motions betraying years of training. Monitors lined the walls, displaying holographic maps, camera feeds, and sensor readings. The air was thick with focus, the hum of equipment blending with the quiet murmur of strategizing voices. Caleb, Argos, and Evelyn followed cautiously, hanging back near the entrance. This was their first glimpse into the inner workings of Echo Division, and it was a sight they wouldn't soon forget. Argos's sharp eyes darted from screen to screen, her mind quickly piecing together what she was seeing. "Not bad," she muttered under her breath, arms crossed, "for a bunch of mortals." Evelyn gave her a sidelong glance, her expression unreadable. "This isn't just mortal tech," she murmured, gesturing toward a screen displaying glowing runic symbols overlaying the map. "That's magic, and advanced magic at that." Caleb, still pale from his encounter with Omega, leaned closer to Evelyn and whispered, "Yeah, and it's a little intimidating. How many resources do these people have?" Eli, seated at the central console, didn't look up but seemed to hear them anyway. "Enough," she said simply, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard as she adjusted sensor readings. Clora approached the newcomers, her expression calm but firm. "You're guests here, and that means you stand to the side, stay quiet, and don't touch anything unless told. Understood?" Argos raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her lips curling into a faint smirk. Caleb nodded quickly, while Evelyn simply inclined her head in acknowledgement. Ashley and DeSera moved to the east wall, coordinating their positions based on the map. Jewel was at the medical station, quietly preparing for any contingencies. Gunnar stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding as he observed the team. The low buzz of a security alert echoed through the room. All eyes turned to the screen, where the entrance camera feed flickered, showing a lone figure standing before the massive metal door. "Rose," Darren muttered, his tone dripping with disdain. Argos perked up at the name, her smirk widening. "Oh, this just got interesting." Gunnar's jaw tightened as he leaned forward, his cybernetic hand gripping the edge of the table. "What the hell is she doing here?" The speakers crackled, carrying Rose's sharp, commanding voice through the room. "All right, wolves, time to play nice. Open up." The pack exchanged glances, tension rippling through the room like a tangible force. The room fell silent as Rose's voice echoed again, dripping with sarcasm and amusement. "Let's not waste time. You've got something I want, and I've got something you need. Open the door, and let's talk like civilized beasts." Gunnar stood straight, his expression unreadable but dangerous. "All right," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Let's see what she wants." The war room fell silent as the loud, deliberate knocks on the front door echoed through the compound. All eyes turned to Gunnar, who stood stoic, his piercing blue eye narrowing in thought. The tension was palpable, the weight of the knock ringing heavy with both curiosity and caution. Darren leaned back in his chair, his usual smirk spreading across his face. "This is going to be fun," he said, breaking the silence. He tilted his head toward Gunnar, his tone light but laced with challenge. "Mind if I handle this one, boss?" Gunnar didn't move immediately, his mind clearly calculating. "You sure you want to?" he asked, his tone sharp but teasing. "Oh, absolutely." Darren pushed himself up, grabbing his shotgun, Thunderstrike, from the rack by the door. "Might as well stretch my legs." "Take Alpha with you," Gunnar said, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just in case." Alpha, already attuned to Gunnar's voice and the rising tension, padded silently to Darren's side, his massive black frame almost blending into the shadows. His glowing yellow eyes locked on Darren as if to say, "Let's see what this is about." "Good boy," Darren muttered, patting Alpha's side before turning to the door. "All right, let's see who's knocking at this hour." Darren approached the door, his boots echoing faintly against the concrete floor. With a calculated ease, he unlocked the heavy latch and pulled the door open just wide enough to see who stood on the other side. Rose leaned casually against the doorframe, her dark eyes gleaming with a mixture of confidence and irritation. She radiated her usual aura of control, but the faintest flicker of surprise crossed her face as she spotted Alpha standing at Darren's side, his golden eyes fixed on her with an unsettling intelligence. "Well, well," Rose said, her sharp tone laced with amusement. "I was beginning to think you were going to make me knock all night." Darren leaned against the doorframe, holding up the small tracker he'd found earlier. "You could have just asked for the address," he said smoothly. "But I'm guessing subtlety isn't your strong suit." Rose's smirk widened. "And if I had asked, would you have given it to me?" Darren paused, feigning thought. "No, definitely not." "Exactly," Rose replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, are you going to let me in? Or should I start leaving claw marks on your fancy door?" Without a word, Darren stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. Alpha's massive frame moved with him, his unblinking gaze still locked on Rose. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, her confidence faltering under the dire wolf's scrutiny. "You bring all your pets to work?" Rose asked, her voice dry as she stepped inside. "Only the ones with better manners than most of my guests," Darren shot back, shutting the door behind her. As Rose stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the faint hum of activity from the war room became audible. Alpha moved silently at Darren's side, his head held high, his presence an unmistakable reminder of the pack's dominance. But Alpha wasn't done. Before Rose could take another step, Alpha circled her, his movements slow and deliberate, as if appraising her. His sharp golden eyes never left hers, his massive paws padding silently against the floor. When he completed the circle, he paused, his head tilting slightly as if in curiosity before letting out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't aggressive, more like a warning. Rose glanced down at him, her smirk wavering. "He doesn't seem to like me." Darren couldn't resist. "Oh, that's just Alpha's way of saying hello. He's a great judge of character." Alpha, as if understanding, let out a sharp huff that almost sounded like a chuckle. Then, in a move both calculated and comical, he brushed past Rose, his massive shoulder nudging her slightly off balance. She caught herself quickly, her sharp gaze narrowing. "Charming," she muttered, brushing off the invisible slight. Darren grinned, thoroughly enjoying the moment. "He likes to make an impression?" "Clearly," Rose replied, her voice tight. As Alpha moved to sit at Gunner's feet, his golden eyes remained locked on Rose. He bared his teeth slightly, not in a snarl, but in what could almost be called a wolfish grin. Rose straightened her jacket, her composure quickly returning. "So, are we going to talk? Or is your mutt going to keep trying to outshine you?" Darren gestured toward the war room. "After you, but just a heads up, he's not the only one you should worry about." Rose raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she followed Darren down the hall. Behind them, Alpha trotted along, his posture calm but vigilant, his presence an unspoken reminder of who held the real power in the room. The war room buzzed with quiet activity as the team turned to see who had arrived. Rose's sharp eyes immediately scanned the room, her attention snagging on the trio standing near the far wall, Evelyn, Argos and Caleb. Her smirk returned, though this time it carried a hint of genuine surprise. "No chains?" she said, her tone mocking. "I expected something a little more medieval." "They're not prisoners," Gunner said, his voice steady and firm. "They're guests." "Generous of you," Rose replied, her gaze flicking to Evelyn and Argos. "Not sure I'd offer the same hospitality." "That's the difference between us," Gunner said, stepping forward. We don't need to play games to get answers. Rose tilted her head, her smirk widening. Oh, I love games, but I think you already know that. Before Gunnar could reply, Alpha let out a soft growl from his position beside him. Rose's eyes flicked to the dire wolf, and for the first time that night, her confidence seemed to waver ever so slightly. Darren leaned against the table, watching the exchange with a grin. Well, this is shaping up to be a fun evening. Clora approached Argos, Caleb, and Evelyn with a calm but firm demeanour, her hazel eyes steady and inviting. Why don't we step into the other room? She asked, her voice soft but commanding. I think it's time we cleared up some misunderstandings. The trio exchanged glances, uncertainty written across their faces. Argos folded her arms, her sharp eyes narrowing. You want to separate us? It's not like that, Clora said, her tone unwavering. I want to give you a chance to ask your questions, without all the extra tension. She shot a subtle glance toward Rose, whose sharp smirk was aimed at Gunnar. You'll have my undivided attention. Caleb hesitated, his gaze flicking between Clora and Evelyn. Evelyn shrugged slightly, muttering, Can't hurt to hear her out. Argos huffed but finally nodded. Fine. Lead the way. Clora gestured toward an adjacent meeting room, and the three followed her, their guarded expressions betraying their unease. As the door closed behind Clora and her group, Eliana turned to Rose, her serene expression masking the sharpness of her words. We meet again, Rose, she said smoothly, stepping forward. And I seem to recall offering you an opportunity to speak openly the last time we crossed paths. Rose's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. I remember, she said, her voice dripping with feigned politeness. But as I recall, you weren't exactly forthcoming yourself. Eliana tilted her head, her silver hair catching the light. I was forthcoming enough to offer you a conversation without strings. Perhaps now you're ready to take me up on that offer. Darren leaned casually against the edge of the table, twirling the tracker between his fingers. Oh, she's here to talk, all right, he said, his grin widening. She just prefers to knock first and leave presents later. Rose's dark eyes flicked to the tracker and she crossed her arms. It's not my fault you lot are so difficult to track down. A girl has to get creative. You call this creative? Gunnar asked, his tone low and sharp. Breaking into our territory, tagging one of my people and showing up unannounced? Rose shrugged, her smirk returning. Desperate times, darling. Eliana stepped closer, her piercing gaze locking onto Rose. Desperation can make even the cleverest person reckless. You should be careful. Recklessness rarely ends well. Rose's smirk faltered again, but she quickly covered it with her usual bravado. Noted. Clora sat across from Argos, Caleb and Evelyn at the long wooden table, her posture relaxed but attentive. Let's start with the basics, she said, her voice steady. Why did you come here? Argos leaned back in her chair, her sharp features set in a defiant scowl. You're the ones who dragged Caleb off. We came to find him. And in doing so, you trespassed on pack land, Clora replied evenly. That's not a small thing, especially considering the trouble we're dealing with right now. Caleb frowned. We didn't mean to cause trouble. We just didn't know what we were walking into. Evelyn leaned forward, her green eyes steady. You've got to understand. We've had our share of run-ins with people who aren't exactly friendly. We thought we were walking into another fight. Clora nodded, her expression softening. And instead, you found yourself in the middle of a bigger mess than you realized. Argos's scowl deepened. We're not looking to get involved in whatever war you're fighting. We've got our own problems. Clora's gaze didn't waver. I'm not asking you to get involved. I'm asking you to understand that we're not your enemies. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension slowly easing. Finally, Caleb spoke up. So, what now? Now, Clora said, we work toward trust. But that starts with honesty. So let me be honest with you. We're not the ones you should be worried about. Rose's sharp gaze darted between Gunnar, Eliana and Darren, her usual confidence starting to fray under the weight of their scrutiny. "All right," she said finally, raising her hands in mock surrender. "You've made your point. I'll play nice. For now." Gunner's icy blue eye remained locked on her. "Good, because the only reason you're still standing here is that I believe you have something useful to say." Rose's smirk returned, but it was weaker this time. "Oh, I do. But you're not going to like it." "Try me," Gunner said. Rose glanced toward Eliana, her expression unreadable. "It's about that little raid of yours the other night. You didn't just hit a safe house, you took the last of something very valuable. And now, someone's very unhappy." Darren's grin widened. "Sounds like a them problem." Rose shot him a glare. "It's going to be an all of us problem if you don't handle it right." Eliana stepped forward, her calm presence commanding the room. "Then start talking, Rose, and don't leave anything out." The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of machinery from Eli's monitors. Rose sat in a chair at the far corner of the war room, her sharp eyes scanning the room as though she could find an escape route. Her usual confidence was there, but it was thinner, stretched, and strained. Eliana, standing by the holographic map, noticed the tension in Rose's posture. The fire mage's hands were balled into fists, her nails biting into her palms as though she were holding something back. It was a side of Rose that none of them had ever seen before, one that suggested cracks in the armor she so meticulously maintained. "Rose," Eliana said gently, stepping forward. Her voice was soft, but it carried the kind of authority that could not be ignored. "Walk with me." Rose's eyes flicked up, narrowing slightly. "What? To a dungeon? Maybe a fiery pit of judgment?" Eliana didn't smile, but her gaze softened. "No, just a walk, away from the eyes and ears of this room." Gunner, leaning against the table with his arms crossed, caught Eliana's glance. He gave a faint nod, signaling his approval. Rose hesitated, then rose from her seat, her shoulders tense as she followed Eliana out of the room. The workshop's grounds were quiet under the stars. Eliana led Rose along a hidden trail toward the river, its soft gurgle the only sound breaking the stillness. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. For a while they walked in silence, the light from the distant wolves' patrols flickering like fireflies. Rose finally spoke, her voice sharp but tinged with an edge of weariness. "You're wasting your time, you know," she said, her tone biting. "I don't do heart-to-hearts." Eliana smiled faintly, her hands clasped loosely in front of her as they walked. "You've done much in your life, Rose, but I wonder, have you ever truly unburdened yourself?" Rose stopped abruptly, crossing her arms. "Is this your grand guardian wisdom? Get the broken fire mage to cry and call it a victory?" Eliana turned to face her, her piercing blue eyes calm but unyielding. "No victory, no pity, only truth." Rose scoffed, but her shoulders sagged, the weight of her words heavy. "Truth? You want truth?" She laughed bitterly, pacing a few steps away. "Fine. Here's your truth. I've spent my entire life clawing for control, over people, over situations, over myself, and now—" She gestured angrily at the bracelet on her wrist. "Now I have nothing." Eliana tilted her head, her voice soft but steady. "You have more than you think." Rose's laugh was hollow. "Do I? Look at me. Once people feared me, respected me. Now I'm nothing more than a powerless relic, trying to bargain with scraps of information just to stay relevant." "You've survived," Eliana said, stepping closer. "Not by magic, but by will, by wit. That is something no power can take from you." Rose's lips parted as though to fire back a retort, but her words faltered. She looked away, her voice breaking. "I don't know who I am anymore." Eliana placed a hand on Rose's shoulder, her touch light but grounding. "You are a woman who has faced the abyss and come through the other side. The bracelet didn't strip you of your identity. It revealed it. You have learned to stand without the crutch of power, to rely on your strength of mind and character. Rose's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back furiously. And what has it gotten me? Humiliation. Loss. No, Ileana countered, her voice firm. It has given you clarity. The Rose standing here now is more than the one who wore her magic like a shield. She is sharp, resilient, and capable of forging her path not through fear, but through trust. Rose shook her head, her voice trembling. Trust? Do you know how many people I've trusted? How many of them turned on me? I know, Ileana said softly, but trust is not about guarantees. It's about choosing to believe, even when it is hard. And I believe in you, Rose. Rose swallowed hard, the vulnerability in her eyes raw and unguarded. Why? Why do you care? Ileana's gaze didn't waver, because I see a woman standing at a crossroads. One path leads back to chaos and isolation, the other to something greater, a chance to build, to belong. Rose was silent for a long moment, her hands clenching and unclenching as though she were waging an internal war. Finally, she looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can. You can, Ileana said, her voice gentle but resolute. But only if you choose to. Rose hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, she said, her voice steadier. But don't think this makes us friends? Ileana smiled faintly. Of course not, but it makes us allies. For now. The night was still as Rose and Ileana strolled along the riverbank, the faint glow of the moon casting silvery ripples across the water. The quiet hum of nature surrounded them, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in Rose's chest. She walked with her arms crossed, her usual air of confidence faltering. I don't think I've ever felt this small, Rose admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a startling confession, one she wouldn't have dared make to anyone but Ileana. It's like everything I've worked for, everything I've fought for, is slipping through my fingers. Ileana regarded her silently for a moment, her serene expression betraying nothing. The Guardian's grace was an imposing presence, but tonight it felt like a comforting one. You've lost something important to you, Ileana said gently. Not just your magic, but your sense of self. The version of you that thrived on chaos and control is being challenged. Rose scoffed, kicking a loose stone into the water. You think I haven't noticed? I've been clawing my way out of pits since the day I was born. But this is different. That bracelet... Her voice faltered as she glanced down at the intricate runes carved into the silver band. It's not just a leash. It's a reminder that I wasn't strong enough. Ileana stopped, turning to face her. The moonlight caught in her platinum hair, making her seem otherworldly. It's not about strength, Rose. It's about what you do when you're at your weakest. That's when true character reveals itself. Rose looked away, the weight of Ileana's words settling over her. She clenched her fists, her voice cracking. Do you know what it's like to be powerless, to stand there while everything you've built is stripped away? Yes, Ileana said simply. The single word was a heavy truth, carrying centuries of pain and resilience. But I also know what it's like to rebuild, to rise stronger not for the sake of power but for purpose. Rose swallowed hard, her usual snark nowhere to be found. And what if I don't know how to do that? You do, Ileana said with quiet certainty. You've already begun. A faint shimmer surrounded Ileana's hands as she raised them, the gentle glow of her magic casting soft shadows around them. Rose froze, her breath catching as the faint pressure of the bracelet eased, the dampening effects fading away. What are you doing? Rose whispered, her voice trembling. Ileana's voice was steady. Restoring your power. Rose felt the surge immediately, the familiar heady rush of magic coursing through her veins. It was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. Her hands glowed faintly with her fire magic as she flexed her fingers, her emotions surging alongside the energy. But just as quickly as the power returned, she noticed something else. The bracelet was still there, its runes faintly glowing. The dampening was gone, but the weight of its presence remained. Rose's expression darkened, her gaze snapping to Eliana. "What's this? Some kind of half measure?" Eliana's expression softened. "The bracelet remains, not as a punishment, but as a symbol. It was Gunnar who placed it on you, and it will be Gunnar who removes it. But only when you've proven to him, and to yourself, that you've earned it." Rose's anger flared briefly, her fire sparking at her fingertips. "Prove myself to Gunnar, that arrogant bastard who can't stand me?" "Yes," Eliana said firmly, "because it's not just about him, it's about showing that you can rise above your pride and your fear, that you can be more than what you've been." Rose's fire dimmed as her shoulders slumped, the weight of Eliana's words settling over her. "And what if I can't?" Eliana placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, her gaze unwavering. "Then you'll try again, and again, until the day you realize you were never as powerless as you thought." The two women stood in silence for a long moment, the river's quiet murmur filling the space between them. Rose's fingers brushed against the bracelet, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "I hate him, you know," she muttered. "Gunnar!" Eliana smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but you also respect him. And that, Rose, is where you'll find your strength." As they turned back toward the workshop, the fire in Rose's heart burned a little brighter, not with anger, but with determination. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that redemption wasn't out of reach. And as much as she hated to admit it, Eliana's faith in her was a spark she couldn't ignore. As they returned to the workshop, the tension between them had eased, though Rose's walls hadn't completely come down. She glanced at Eliana as they neared the door. "You know, for a guardian, you're not half bad." Eliana chuckled softly. "And for a fire mage, you're stronger than you realize." Rose smirked faintly, but the warmth in her eyes was unmistakable. For the first time in a long while, she felt lighter. And perhaps, just perhaps, a little less alone. Eliana and Rose walked side by side through the dimly lit hallways of the workshop, their soft footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Rose, now restored with her powers but still bearing the magic-dampening bracelet, radiated an almost unfamiliar vulnerability mixed with her usual defiance. As they approached the war room, Eliana cast her a brief, measured glance. "Remember," Eliana said quietly, her voice gentle but firm, "this isn't about pride. It's about trust. They deserve the truth." Rose gave a sharp exhale, her trademark smirk faltering for just a moment. "Trust is a funny thing, isn't it? You're asking me to gamble with something I've spent lifetimes avoiding." "Perhaps it's time to stop avoiding," Eliana replied softly. "Perhaps it's time to rebuild." The door to the war room swung open and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Gunnar stood near the table, his cybernetic fingers tapping rhythmically against his arm. Darren was leaning back in his chair, his boots propped up on the table, a sharp grin already playing across his face. As the two women entered, the room fell silent, Gunnar's piercing blue eye locked on Rose, his expression unreadable but heavy with expectation. Darren tilted his head, his grin widening as he gestured toward Rose with mock theatrics. "Well, well, if it isn't our favourite firecracker, back from her heart-to-heart with Eliana. Did she give you a lecture, or just let you cry it out?" His tone was biting but laced with humour. Rose shot him a look that could melt steel. "Oh, Darren, darling, I didn't realise you cared." "Enough," Gunnar said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. His gaze shifted to Eliana. "You removed the dampening, didn't you?" Eliana nodded, stepping forward calmly. "I did." but the bracelet remains. She has her magic restored, but the bracelet serves as a reminder. Rose knows what's at stake. Do I? Rose murmured, her smirk returning faintly. But the weight in her eyes betrayed her unease. Gunner's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Aeliana, I trust your judgment, but this isn't just about Rose. If this goes wrong, the consequences fall on all of us. I'm aware, Aeliana said, her tone unwavering, but I believe Rose understands the gravity of this better than anyone. Rose raised her hands in mock surrender, her voice dripping with sarcasm. All right. Let's skip the scolding and get to the juicy part, shall we? You want information? I'll give you information. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the room. The raid you pulled off the other night? That wasn't just some random stash. That was the last of the drug supply Ravina had. I'd say you've officially made yourselves her #1 target. The room tensed at her words, the weight of the revelations sinking in. Darren straightened in his chair, his smirk replaced with genuine concern. And how do you know this? Gunnar asked, his tone low and measured. Rose shrugged, her expression calm but her voice edged with frustration. Because I pay attention, Gunnar. Ravina's no fool. She's methodical, and she doesn't waste resources. That drug wasn't just some tool for chaos. It was her leverage, her way of keeping her pets under control. And now it's gone. And you think she'll retaliate? Gunnar asked, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of his position. Rose met his gaze, her smirk faltering slightly. Oh, she won't just retaliate. She'll escalate. Ravina doesn't lose gracefully. Darren let out a low whistle, leaning forward. Great. So we've got a demigod with a grudge. That's just what we needed. Got any other bad news for us, Rose? Rose hesitated, her sharp wit momentarily dulled. She glanced at Aeliana, then back at Gunnar. Only this. Ravina's watching. She's got eyes everywhere, and she's playing a long game. If you think you've seen her worst, you're wrong. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Gunnar's expression hardened, his mind already working through the implications. And what do you want in return for this information? He asked finally, his tone sharp. Rose tilted her head, her smirk returning faintly. Oh, nothing much, just a seat at the table. If we're dealing with Ravina, you'll need someone who understands her game. And can we trust you? Darren asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Rose met her gaze, her smirk fading. For the first time there was no sarcasm, no deflection, just honesty. You'll have to decide that for yourselves. But if you want to beat Ravina, you'll need me. The room remained silent, the decision hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Gunnar nodded, his voice firm but cautious. All right, Rose, you're in. But understand this. If you cross us, the bracelet stays, and I won't hesitate to make it permanent. Rose's smirk returned, but her eyes held a flicker of something deeper. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude. Understood, Alpha. Let's see how far this trust thing gets us. The tension eased slightly, but the weight of the coming battle remained. As the team prepared for what lay ahead, one thing was clear. The fight against Ravina was only just beginning. The war room was quiet save for the faint hum of monitors and the occasional shuffle of papers. Rose stood by the large central table, her arms crossed, her sharp gaze darting between the members of the pack. The weight of the earlier revelations lingered in the air, but Rose wasn't one to dwell. I want to see my people, she said, breaking the silence. Her tone was firm, tinged with a rare vulnerability. If we're truly trying to build trust here, then let me see them. Gunnar studied her, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Aeliana and Darren exchanged glances, the tension palpable. You're in no position to make demands, Gunnar replied, his voice low but steady. But, fine, Clora's with them now, I'll take you. Rose's lips twitched into a faint smirk. I knew you had a heart under all that gruff exterior, Gunner. He didn't rise to the bait, motioning for her to follow. Darren fell in step behind them, his ever-present smirk hinting at his anticipation for whatever chaos might unfold next. The door to the conference room opened with a soft creak, revealing Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos seated around the table. Clora leaned casually against the wall, her watchful eyes flicking toward the newcomers. As Rose stepped into the room, all three of her people sat up straighter. Caleb's eyes widened, relief flooding his expression. "Rose?" "Caleb," she replied, her tone softening for the first time that night. Her gaze moved to Evelyn and Argos, taking in their wary but unharmed states. "You all look intact." "Good." Evelyn frowned slightly. "We're fine. Surprisingly, they've been—" "Decent," Argos interrupted, her tone flat. "Though I wouldn't exactly call this a 5-star experience." Clora arched a brow, but Rose's smirk deepened as she stepped further into the room. "I'm sure it's been an adjustment," she said lightly, her eyes flicking to Clora. "But I can see you've been accommodating." Clara's expression didn't waver. "We're not in the business of unnecessary hostility." "Glad to hear it," Rose replied before turning back to her people. Her smirk faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "Look, I need to say something." Rose extended her hand toward Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos, her fingers curling slightly. A faint, shimmering glow emanated from her palm, subtle but unmistakable. A brief flicker of magic. It was enough to make Caleb's eyes widen in recognition and for Evelyn to stiffen. "You've got your power back," Evelyn murmured, her tone both surprised and wary. Rose let the glow fade, her smirk returning. "Let's just say, arrangements were made, but that's not the point." Argos tilted her head, her sharp eyes narrowing. "What is the point?" "The point," Rose said, her voice steady now, "is that everything you've done here, everything you've been through, it's on me. I sent you to learn what you could, to watch, to gather information. And in hindsight, I see how badly that could have gone." She stepped closer to the table, her gaze sweeping over her team. "You followed my orders. You trusted me. And now I'm here to make it right." Rose's admission hung in the air, the weight of her words settling over the room. Caleb leaned forward, his brows furrowed. "So, what now? Are we done playing spy games?" "Yes," Rose replied firmly. "We're done. These people—" She gestured to Clora and the others by the door. "Aren't our enemies. They're complicated allies, maybe. But they're not what I thought they were." Evelyn exchanged a glance with Argos, her expression skeptical. "And we're just supposed to take your word for that?" Rose's smirk returned, tinged with exasperation. "Yes, darling, because I'm standing here, aren't I? If they wanted us gone, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Clora straightened, her calm voice cutting through the moment. "Rose is right about one thing. Trust takes time, but it starts here. If you want to walk out of here tonight with your heads held high, it's your choice. No one's holding you here." The room remained thick with tension. Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos watched quietly as Rose stood across from Gunner, her usual smirk subdued but present. Gunner's expression, however, was anything but amused. His piercing blue eye bore into her, unreadable yet commanding. The air between them felt as though it could snap at any moment. Rose spoke first, her voice sharp but measured. "So, we're done here then? My people and I can leave?" Gunner's jaw tightened. His arms crossed over his chest. He gave a small, reluctant nod. "You can go, but let me be clear, stay off our land unless invited. Next time, there won't be warnings." Rose's smirk curled higher, her tone laced with mockery. "Noted, Alpha." Before she could step back to her team, Darren's voice cut through the tension like a blade, smooth and disarming. "Wait a minute." All eyes turned to him as he stood, his casual demeanor masking something deeper. His dark eyes gleamed with the kind of confidence only he could pull off. This isn't how this ends, Darren said, his voice firm but not harsh. Rose, Gunner, you two need to shake on this. Rose let out a dry laugh, crossing her arms. Shake on it. You must be joking. Darren stepped forward, closing the space between them with ease. Not even a little. You two are the leaders here. If we're moving forward, if we're calling this a truce, it starts with you. Gunner's frown deepened, his cybernetic hand twitching at his side. Darren, I don't need— Yes, you do, Darren interrupted, his tone carrying an edge of authority. This isn't just about you or her, this is about the pack, and whether you like it or not, Rose has earned her place here tonight. Rose arched an eyebrow, her smirk fading slightly as she studied Darren. You're awfully sentimental for someone who usually thrives on sarcasm. Call it practicality, Darren shot back, his grin returning. Or maybe I just enjoy watching you squirm. The room was silent for a moment, all eyes on Gunner and Rose. Finally, Gunner exhaled sharply, stepping forward, his gaze locked with Rose's, his expression cold but not unkind. This doesn't mean I trust you, he said flatly. Rose smirked, tilting her head. The feeling's mutual. Slowly, deliberately, Gunner extended his hand. Rose hesitated for a fraction of a second before clasping it with her own. The handshake was firm, unyielding, two forces acknowledging one another without bending. Pack made, Darren said, his voice carrying a note of finality. As the handshake ended, Rose stepped back toward her people, a glimmer of respect flickering in her dark eyes. Caleb, Evelyn and Argos exchanged glances, uncertain but intrigued by what they'd just witnessed. Aeliana, standing quietly near the doorway, offered a small, approving nod. Mylorian remained impassive but observant, his presence a steady anchor in the room. Gunner turned to his team, his voice steady and commanding. We're done here. Let's regroup in the morning. Rose gave one last glance over her shoulder as she and her team moved to leave. You're not as insufferable as I thought, Alpha. Maybe this could work. Gunner didn't respond, but his silence carried a weight that left the room lingering in thought. As Rose and her team moved toward the exit, the pack began to disperse, tension slowly bleeding from the air. But as Argos stepped past Aeliana and Mylorian, the two guardians exchanged a glance. Aeliana's serene expression softened further, while Mylorian's sharp gaze lingered on Argos with quiet scrutiny. Argos, Aeliana said gently, her melodic voice carrying a weight of authority. Argos hesitated, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly as she turned to face the elf. What? Argos's tone was defensive, though not aggressive. She folded her arms across her chest, trying to mask her unease. Aeliana stepped closer, her ethereal presence both calming and disarming. You carry something with you, she said softly, something ancient and powerful. Mylorian inclined his head, his voice steady but firm. Its magic radiates from you, even as you try to conceal it. You may not understand it fully, but it is not something to be ignored. Argos stiffened, her claws flexing at her sides. I don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, though her voice betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Aeliana smiled faintly, unbothered by the deflection. You don't need to admit it to us, but know this. When you are ready to face it, ready to understand its origins and its purpose, we can help you. Argos blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected offer. Her sharp features softened for a moment before she quickly masked her surprise with a smirk. You think I need your help, elf? Not need, Aeliana corrected gently, but you may find it valuable. The choice will always be yours. Mylorian stepped forward, his presence as commanding as ever. Whatever you carry, it is tied to a larger thread. A thread that will eventually pull you into something greater than yourself. Deny it if you wish, but it will not be denied forever. Argos's smirk faltered, her sharp eyes darting between the two guardians. For the first time in a long while, she felt exposed, not by malice or force, but by understanding. It unnerved her more than she cared to admit. "I'll think about it," she muttered finally, her tone begrudging. "That's all we ask," Eliana said with a nod, her expression warm but serious. "And when the time comes, you know where to find us." As Argos rejoined Rose and the others, her thoughts were uncharacteristically scattered. Caleb glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "You good?" "Yeah," Argos replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "Let's just get out of here." Rose, now fully in command of herself and her team, gave one final glance over her shoulder at Gunnar and the pack. Her eyes flickered briefly to Eliana, a faint trace of curiosity crossing her features before she pushed it aside. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet as they made their way back to their vehicle. But as the car started and the headlights pierced the darkness, Argos couldn't help but glance back at the workshop, her mind lingering on the Guardian's words. Eliana and Maelorion watched from the shadows of the war room's doorway, their expressions unreadable as the car disappeared down the gravel road. "Do you think she'll return?" Maelorion asked finally, his voice low. Eliana tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. "In time," she said, "when she's ready." As the door shut behind Rose and her team, Darren leaned back against the wall, his arms crossed and a satisfied grin on his face. "Well, that was fun." Clora rolled her eyes, muttering, "You live for this chaos, don't you?" "Absolutely," Darren replied, his grin widening. Gunnar shook his head, his gaze distant as he spoke. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." "No," Eliana said softly, stepping closer to him. "But it's a start." The pack began to disperse, the tension easing as the night wore on. Outside, the stars sparkled against the inky sky, a quiet reminder of the battles won and the ones still to come. In the war room, Gunnar stood alone for a moment, his thoughts heavy but resolute. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, the pack had taken a step forward, together. On the bluff overlooking the facility, the chill wind tugged at Ravina's cloak as she stood atop the rocky bluff, her piercing eyes locked on the secure facility below. The compound sprawled beneath her like a fortress, its layered defences a testament to the secrets it protected. From her vantage point, she watched the helicopter land, its rotors kicking up dust and debris as it touched down in the facility's central courtyard. The trader, shackled and dishevelled, was escorted from the chopper by Shade and Karina. Ravina's lips curled into a faint, humourless smile as her keen eyes followed their every move. The two operatives moved with purpose, their vigilance apparent even at this distance. But it didn't matter. They didn't see her. They didn't know she was there. Ravina's fingers brushed the pendant at her throat, a relic imbued with tracking magic. It had served her well, leading her here, allowing her to monitor the transfer. She watched as the trader was taken inside, the heavy gates closing behind them with a finality that even she had to respect. "Impressive," she murmured, her tone devoid of admiration. It wasn't impenetrable, no place ever was, but it would require careful planning. For now, she would wait. The game was far from over. Ravina turned on her heel, her cloak billowing behind her as she disappeared into the shadows of the surrounding forest. Her destination was clear, Draven's realm. It was time to demand answers. And results. In Draven's realm. The air in Draven's fortress was thick with an oppressive heat, the dim light casting jagged shadows across the stone walls. Ravina's presence was announced not by words, but by the sharp click of her heels echoing through the grand hall. Her expression was a mask of icy fury, her eyes blazing as she strode toward Draven's throne. Draven sat slumped on his ornate seat, his once imposing figure now haggard and worn. The loss of the celestial gem had drained more than his resources. It had sapped his confidence, leaving him a shadow of the ruthless ruler he once was. But Ravina saw no room for sympathy. She only saw failure. "You've kept me waiting," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. She stopped a few paces from his throne, her posture rigid, her aura commanding. Draven's eyes narrowed. "Ravina, I don't recall inviting you." She laughed coldly. "An invitation? Don't flatter yourself. I'm here because your incompetence has jeopardized everything I've built. The Voidstone shipments have stopped, my operations are crumbling, and you sit here." She gestured sharply at his throne, like a defeated dog licking its wounds. Draven's jaw tightened, a flicker of defiance flashing across his face. The celestial gem was stolen. Without it, accessing Nethoria is... "Spare me your excuses," Ravina snapped, her voice cutting through the hall like a whip. She stepped closer, her presence looming over him. "You lost the gem. You let a petty thief outmaneuver you. And now you have the audacity to sit here and whine about it?" Draven rose from his throne, his fists clenched, his pride stung. "Do not presume to lecture me, Ravina. You think your little drug empire makes you untouchable?" She met his glare with one of her own, unflinching. "My empire," she said, enunciating every word, "is the only reason you still have allies in this realm. Without my resources, your power would be nothing but a memory. So, you will fix this. You will find a way to supply me with Voidstone again, or I will ensure that whatever shred of influence you still possess is erased." The silence that followed was heavy, the air crackling with tension. Draven's eyes burned with resentment, but he knew better than to lash out. Ravina was right. His position was precarious, and her support was the only thing keeping his enemies at bay. "Very well," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "I will take action." Ravina smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. And let me be clear, Draven. I'm not interested in promises. I want results." Without waiting for a response, she turned and swept from the hall, her steps echoing in her wake. Draven watched her go, his expression dark and brooding. Her words had struck a nerve, igniting a fire of anger and desperation within him. She had pushed him into a corner, and now he would act, recklessly, if need be. As the shadows of his realm seemed to close in around him, Draven muttered to himself, "You'll regret underestimating me, Ravina." The spark of chaos. Outside Draven's fortress, Ravina paused for a moment, her cold smile returning. She had planted the seed, forced his hand. Whatever Draven did next would undoubtedly create ripples, and she would be watching, ready to exploit every misstep. The war was coming, and Ravina intended to be on the winning side, no matter the cost. The early morning sun cast long golden shadows across the Echo Division courtyard, its warmth doing little to ease the chill in the air. The hum of quiet activity filled the space, but it was subdued, marked by the absence of Rose and her team, who had departed the previous night. The pack moved with purpose, preparing for the day, their camaraderie steady, but tinged with an unspoken tension. In the heart of the workshop, Mylorion stood near the glowing portal room, his expression calm but resolute. The faint shimmer of the portal's energy bathed his imposing figure in soft light, a stark contrast to the weight of the news he had delivered mere hours ago. The Guardian Council had summoned him urgently. Reports of the Spectre Wolf rising in Alfheim and the delicate balance tipping across the dimensions demanded his immediate attention. Aeliana approached quietly, her platinum hair catching the light, her movements graceful but purposeful. She carried her staff loosely in one hand, the other brushing the fabric of her intricately woven robes. Her expression was serene, but her eyes betrayed a mix of worry and determination. "The Council will expect us soon," Mylorion said, his voice steady. "Time is not on our side." Aeliana nodded, her gaze drifting across the workshop. "I know, but there are matters here that remain unresolved. I've already spoken with Clora and the others. They understand the situation, but there's one more conversation I need to have." Mylorion inclined his head slightly, his piercing gaze softening. With Gunnar. She didn't answer, but the faintest trace of a smile touched her lips before she turned and walked toward the training grounds, where Gunnar's presence was unmistakable. Gunnar stood in the corner of the training grounds, his broad shoulders tense as he inspected the freshly upgraded armory rack. His cybernetic fingers ran along the edge of his weapon, Starbreaker, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. The distant sound of footsteps drew his attention, and he looked up to see Aliana approaching. For a moment neither spoke. The unspoken weight of their shared history hung in the air, heavier than the crisp morning breeze. Aliana stopped a few feet away, her staff resting lightly against the ground. "You're leaving," Gunnar said finally, his tone low but steady. It wasn't a question. Aliana nodded. "The Council's summons cannot be ignored. The rise of the Spectre Wolf across my realm is no small matter. If we delay, the consequences could be catastrophic." Gunnar's jaw tightened, and he turned his gaze back to Starbreaker. "And Earth?" "Earth will not be forgotten," she said firmly. "I'll continue to push for the Council's support for Echo Division, the enchanted ammunition production, the secure gateways. It's all in motion, but I'll need time to ensure they honor their commitments." Gunnar's piercing blue eye met hers, the intensity in his gaze softening only slightly. "And you think they'll listen to you?" Aliana smiled faintly. "They will. I've been known to be persuasive." The corner of Gunnar's mouth twitched in what might have been a smirk, but it faded quickly. He exhaled sharply, the sound carrying both frustration and understanding. "This place is going to feel a lot quieter without you here." Aliana stepped closer, her expression softening as she placed a hand gently on his arm. "You've led this team through battles most wouldn't survive. You don't need me here to remind you of your strength. But I'll be back, Gunnar. I promise." His gaze dropped briefly to the ground before returning to her. "And if you're not?" Aliana's hand lingered on his arm for a moment longer, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Then I trust you to carry on without me, to protect what we've built." For a moment it seemed as though Gunnar might say something more, but the sound of Maelorian's voice calling from the portal room broke the spell. "It's time," Maelorian announced, his tone even but commanding. Aliana let her hand fall away, stepping back. She hesitated, her expression shifting slightly, as if weighing her next words. "Take care of them, Gunnar, and take care of yourself." He nodded once, his voice gruff. "You too." As Aliana turned to leave, Gunnar watched her go, his expression unreadable. The weight of her absence settled over him even before she disappeared from view. The shimmering portal cast an ethereal glow as Maelorion and Aliana stood side by side, ready to step through. The Pack and Echo Division team gathered quietly nearby, their expressions a mix of respect and unease. Maelorion addressed them briefly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "The Council will deliberate on the matters we've discussed, but the defense of Earth now rests in your hands. Trust one another, and you will endure." Aliana's gaze swept across the group, her eyes lingering on each of them before settling on Gunnar. "This is not goodbye," she said softly. "Only a necessary step forward. You've already proven you can face what lies ahead." With a final nod, Maelorian stepped through the portal, his form dissolving into the shimmering light. Aliana paused, glancing back one last time, her expression unreadable but filled with quiet resolve. Then, with a graceful step, she followed. The portal closed behind them, leaving the team standing in silence. Gunnar exhaled slowly, his cybernetic fingers clenching briefly before relaxing at his side. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We've got work to do. Let's not waste time." The team dispersed, their movements purposeful as they prepared for the challenges ahead. But for Gunnar the morning felt heavier, as though the absence of the Guardians left a void not easily filled. Yet, beneath the weight, a spark of determination burned brighter than ever. The sound of muffled clanking echoed through the brightly lit garage as Darren stepped inside, his boots scuffing lightly against the concrete floor. Rows of tools lined the walls, each meticulously arranged, and in the far corner stood the Wolfmobile, its sleek but rugged frame coated with a fine layer of dust from weeks in storage. Darren let out a low whistle as he approached, running a hand along its side. "Well, you've seen better days," he muttered before calling out, "Keebler, you around?" A faint hum of energy and the sound of rapid typing came from a workstation on the other side of the room. Eli appeared from behind a cluttered table, her silver hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her violet eyes sparkling with curiosity. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and the slump in her usually sharp posture hinted at how overworked she was. "You rang?" she said, smirking faintly as she wiped her hands on a grease-stained cloth. Her gaze shifted to the Wolfmobile, and her eyebrows lifted. "Wow, they finally let you bring it out of hibernation. What's the occasion?" Darren leaned against the vehicle, crossing his arms. "Gunner's orders. He wants this thing ready to roll. Says we might be needing it soon." Eli tilted her head, stepping closer to inspect the UTV. "Define ready. Because last I checked, the frame on this thing was solid, but it could definitely use some upgrades." "That's exactly what I'm here for," Darren said, flashing a grin. "Gunner wants it stronger and faster. Think you can work your magic?" Eli snorted, pulling a wrench from her belt and tossing it to him. "All right, hotshot. If you're going to stand there, you might as well make yourself useful. Start by loosening the bolts on the front frame." Darren caught the wrench with ease, smirking. "You're putting me to work now. I thought that's what geniuses like you were for." "Genius is delegate," Eli shot back, already pulling a schematic from her workstation and pinning it to the board. "And I'm not lifting that frame with my bare hands while you're standing there looking pretty." He worked quickly, the wrench clinking against metal as Eli began inspecting the turret mount. She sighed heavily as she scanned her notes, muttering under her breath. "Engine's getting a kinetic energy booster and I'll have to rebuild the turret controls before we can install anything fancy." Darren paused, leaning on the vehicle. "What about the minigun? Still in pieces?" Eli sighed again, rubbing her temple. "Yeah, stabilizing the energy core's a pain. I'll prioritize enchanting the 240 Bravo for now. You're going to have to be patient for your dream turret." Darren frowned, noticing the tension in her voice and the fatigue etched on her face. "You doing okay, Keebler? You look like you've been burning the candle at both ends." Eli gave him a tired smirk. "You think this place runs itself?" "Between the upgrades, the weapons maintenance, and keeping the tech in one piece, I'm lucky I even remember what sleep feels like." "Well, how about you delegate some of that genius stuff to me?" Darren said, handing her the wrench with a grin. "I'm more than just a pretty face, you know." Eli rolled her eyes but let out a small laugh. "Fine. Loosen the other bolts while I prep the alloy mix. But if you break anything, you're explaining it to Gunner." "Deal," Darren said, getting back to work. "But only because I don't want you collapsing on this thing. We need you in one piece." The garage filled with the sound of tinkering, Eli occasionally barking orders at Darren, who, to her amusement, complied with minimal complaints. The hum of her magic blended with the clatter of tools, creating a rhythm that filled the room with purpose. The hum of overhead lights flickered slightly as Darren stepped back, admiring the work they've completed in early hours of the next morning. The Wolfmobile sat front and center, its reinforced frame gleaming faintly in the fluorescent glow. Tools were scattered across the floor and workbenches, evidence of a long night's labor. Eli was slumped over her workstation, her silver hair falling loose around her face, dark circles etched under her violet eyes. She stared at the engine mounted on a stand, her focus sharp but visibly strained. Darren let out a low whistle, stepping closer. "Well, you really worked this thing over, huh?" Eli glanced up, her smirk tired but present. "Frames reinforced, engines out, and if you give me another hour, I might actually have this thing running like a dream." Darren leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "Or you might pass out right here. Seriously, Keebler, you look like you're running on fumes." Eli groaned, rubbing her temples. I'll sleep when the pack isn't relying on me to keep their equipment from falling apart. Darren raised an eyebrow, his voice softening. Look, you've done enough for now. The frame's solid, the engine's out. It's already a hell of a lot more progress than anyone expected. Go get some rest. Eli shook her head stubbornly. I'm fine. Just need a little more time. Darren stepped in front of her, crossing his arms and fixing her with a pointed look. Eli, if you keep pushing yourself, you're going to burn out. Go lie down for a bit. I'll keep an eye on everything. She hesitated, exhaustion warring with her pride. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping. Fine, 30 minutes. But if I hear you've touched anything enchanted, you're dead. Noted, Darren said, grinning as she shuffled toward the cot, tucked in the corner of the garage. As Eli collapsed onto it, her breathing evened out almost instantly, and Darren shook his head, muttering, "Stubborn as hell, but she's earned it." He returned to the workbench, carefully sorting tools and cleaning up the workspace, making a mental note to leave the magic alone this time. The garage remained quiet, save for the faint clinking of tools and the soft sound of Eli's steady breathing. The reinforced Wolfmobile stood as a testament to their teamwork, ready for the battles to come. Gunnar was seated in the war room, his sharp blue eyes scanning reports of recent supernatural activity when the talisman around his neck began to glow faintly. The warmth of the enchanted item was unmistakable, its activation signaling a direct message from Eliana. Pressing his hand to the talisman, Gunnar closed his eye, allowing the connection to form. Eliana's calm but urgent voice filled his mind. Gunnar, I need you and Eli to come to Alfheim at once. The council has called for you. Gunnar's jaw tightened. What's going on? There's been a development, she replied, her tone heavy with meaning. I can't explain everything through the talisman, but the situation is critical. The portal in your secure portal room will open shortly. Be ready. Understood, Gunnar replied aloud, already rising from his chair. We'll be there. The connection faded, leaving the room steeped in silence. Gunnar turned to face Clora and Desera, who were seated at the long table, poring over mission details and logistical reports. Both looked up as Gunnar straightened, his expression calm but firm. I've been summoned to Alfheim, Gunnar said, his voice steady. Eli and I are heading out immediately. Clora's brows furrowed, her hazel eyes sharp with concern. What's going on? The council needs us, Gunnar replied. Eliana wasn't specific, but it's serious enough to call us both. You'll hold things down here. Desera nodded, her expression resolute. Understood. Do you have an estimate on how long you'll be gone? No idea, Gunnar admitted, but you know the protocols. Keep the team focused, and if anything changes, you have full command authority over Echo Division. Desera, the season's second-in-command of Echo Division, gave a sharp nod, her presence exuding calm leadership. Understood. We'll maintain operational readiness. You focus on what needs to be done there. Clora, the pack's female alpha, leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. She was the picture of tactical precision, her role tightly aligned with keeping the pack mission ready. Her hazel eyes were sharp with a mix of concern and determination. We've got it covered, Gunnar. Just make sure you come back in one piece. The pack will be ready to support whatever comes next. Gunnar gave them each a small nod of appreciation before turning on his heel and striding out of the room, his pace unyielding as he headed toward the garage to find Eli. The soft hum of machinery filled the garage as Gunnar pushed the heavy door open, stepping into the familiar scent of oil and magic-infused alloys. Eli was standing by a workbench, her silver hair slightly tousled, and her expression caught somewhere between irritation and begrudging amusement. Darren, she growled, her hands on her hips as she glared at the empty space where her alarms used to be. You are so dead when I catch you. Gunnar arched an eyebrow, crossing his arms. What did he do this time? Eli spun around, startled, her violet eyes flashing with residual annoyance. He took out all my alarms, every single one. My work alerts, My backup alerts. Even the one I set, in case the first 5 failed. I woke up thinking it was 10 minutes later, only to find out it's been hours. Gunnar smirked faintly. Sounds like he did you a favor. You needed the rest. Eli scoffed, running a hand through her hair. Oh, don't you start. I've got enough smart-ass comments to deal with from Darren. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Darren poked his head around the corner of the garage door, his signature grin plastered across his face. You're welcome, by the way. You look 10 years younger, Keebler. Eli narrowed her eyes at him, grabbing the nearest wrench from the workbench and pointing it threateningly in his direction. If you don't disappear in the next 5 seconds, this is going straight at your head. Oh, come on, Darren said, stepping fully into the garage. You needed sleep, and you know it. I'm basically a hero. Eli sighed heavily, her irritation giving way to a reluctant grin. You're a menace. That's what you are. Glad we're all in agreement, Gunnar cut in, his voice firm but laced with faint amusement. But playtime's over. Eli, we've got orders. Eliana's called us to Alfheim. The portal's opening soon. Eli straightened, her expression shifting instantly to focused determination. What's the situation? Something big, Gunnar replied. She wasn't specific, but it's enough for the council to summon us both. Get your gear and meet me in the portal room. Eli nodded sharply, grabbing her toolkit and a compact satchel from the workbench. As she passed Darren, she jabbed him lightly in the shoulder with the wrench. This isn't over. Darren grinned wider, stepping aside. I'll be here when you get back. Try not to break anything important while you're gone. As Gunnar and Eli exited the garage, the tension of the upcoming missions settled between them. Whatever waited on the other side of the portal, they both knew it would demand everything they had. And, for better or worse, they were ready. The secure portal room hummed with an ambient energy as intricate runes on the walls glowed faintly. Gunnar and Clora stood side by side, both alert as the shimmering light of the portal began to coalesce. Eli entered moments later, her gear slung across her shoulder, still muttering about Darren's antics, but now focused and ready for the mission. The portal solidified with a sharp burst of energy, and before Gunnar or Eli could step through, 4 elven figures emerged from the other side. Clad in gleaming silver armor adorned with the crest of Alfheim, they carried an air of authority. At their head was a tall elf with piercing green eyes and a lieutenant's insignia etched into his armor. His gaze scanned the room before locking on to Clora. Lieutenant Phelan, he said, his tone formal but carrying a hint of warmth. It's been a long time. Clora's hazel eyes widened slightly in recognition, a rare flicker of surprise crossing her face. Lieutenant Arundel, she said, stepping forward. I didn't expect to see you here. Last I heard, you were still with Silver Leaf. Arundel inclined his head, a faint smile gracing his lips. I was, until your request to the Guardian Council changed the course of our unit. You saved us, Clora. It's an honor to stand here now, assigned to your division. Clora blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in the conversation. Assigned? Arundel gestured to the 3 elves behind him, their postures rigid and disciplined. We've been tasked by the Guardian Council to serve Echo Division. Our primary mission is to guard this portal, which will now remain open as a secure connection between Alfheim and Earth. Secondary to that, we're here to assist in any operations that require our expertise. Gunnar crossed his arms, his sharp blue eye narrowing as he sized up the newcomers. And this was decided without consultation. Arundel met his gaze evenly. The Council determined it was necessary for the stability of both realms. I understand the concerns, but we are here to aid you, not impose. Clora placed a hand on Gunnar's arm, her voice calm but firm. Arundel's word is good, Gunnar. I know him. If he says they're here to help, they are. Gunnar exhaled sharply but gave a small nod. Fine, but make no mistake. Echo Division operates as a unit. You take orders from me or Clora. Clear? Crystal, Erendil replied smoothly, his expression unwavering. The momentary tension eased as Clora exchanged a brief knowing smile with Erendil. Gunnar turned his attention back to the portal, his cybernetic fingers flexing slightly. "Let's move," Gunnar said, stepping forward. Clora lingered for a moment, her gaze locked with Erendil's. "We'll catch up later," she said quietly. "Looking forward to it," he replied, stepping back with his unit to take up positions near the portal. With Eli at his side, Gunnar stepped into the shimmering light of the portal, the familiar pull of its magic enveloping them. Clora watched as the glow consumed them, her mind already shifting back to the duties that awaited her on Earth. The portal pulsed once before stabilizing, its connection now a permanent bridge between realms. The 4 elven guards took their places, their presence a silent reminder of the growing ties and challenges between Alfheim and Earth. Deep within the hidden prison, the sterile silence of the hidden prison was punctuated only by the occasional footsteps of guards patrolling the cold, steel corridors. The air hung heavy with the scent of sanitizer and cold metal, a stark contrast to the dark energy pulsing within the facility's most secured cell. Here, Trinity Shinner lay still on her cot, her face a mask of serenity that belied the chaos brewing beneath. Her hand rested on her swollen abdomen, where an unnatural warmth radiated. The sinister energy growing within her was no longer subtle. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, sending ripples of power through her veins. Dark whispers that had once been faint echoes now grew stronger, more insistent, weaving promises of power and destruction. The sound of multiple footsteps echoing down the corridor drew Trinity's attention. Her crimson eyes snapped open, a wicked smile spreading across her lips as she sensed a familiar, malevolent presence. Though muted, the essence of Ultranacious Eternus was unmistakable. Her fingers traced circles on her stomach as she whispered, "So, the shadow still lingers." As the footsteps grew louder, Trinity sat up with deliberate grace. Through the reinforced bars, she watched as Shade and Karina escorted the trader toward a secure cell further down the hall. The trader's aura roiled with desperation and fear, but what caught Trinity's attention was the faint trace of Ultranacious Eternus's essence clinging to him like a shroud. "Still playing guard dog, Karina?" Trinity's voice slid through the air like silk over steel. "How far we've come from our days in the field together." Karina's steps faltered for just a moment, her shoulders tensing. Trinity caught the slight tremor in her former colleague's hand as it moved closer to her weapon, a tell she'd noticed long ago during their shared missions. Those days of partnership now seemed like a lifetime ago, before Trinity had revealed her true nature. Shade's sharp eyes flicked toward Trinity's cell, his presence a steady counterpoint to the tension radiating from Karina. But Trinity's focus remained on her former partner, noting how the years had changed her. Power radiated from Karina now, a curious blend of light and shadow, ancient and untapped. "Your new role suits you better than the old one," Trinity called after them, her voice dropping to a knowing whisper. "At least now you're honest about being a jailer." The group disappeared down the corridor, but Trinity leaned back against the cold wall with satisfaction. The whispers in her mind grew louder, and she felt the child within her respond to their dark symphony. "Soon," she murmured, crimson eyes narrowing. "Very soon, they'll remember why they fear the dark." In the depths of Alfheim, the wolf den lay shrouded in unnatural silence, broken only by the nervous whimpers of wolf pups huddled against their mother. Apart from the group, the corrupted pup stood watch, its lean frame casting long shadows in the dim light. Red eyes gleamed with malevolent intelligence as it observed its siblings, shadows coiling around its legs like living smoke. The mother wolf's ears lay flat against her head, her muscles tense as she watched her transformed child. Her muzzle was flecked with grey, not from age, but from the stress of bearing witness to her pup's corruption. When the Dark One moved, she would pull her other pups closer, her protective growl dying in her throat as instinctive fear overwhelmed maternal courage. The corrupted pup's movements were liquid shadow, each step leaving tiny patches of withered grass in its wake. The essence of Ultranacius Eternus had twisted it into something ancient and terrible, a creature of shadow wearing the skin of a wolf. Small animals fell silent at its approach, and even the ever-present glow of Alfheim's enchanted forests dimmed where it walked. Without warning, the pup's head snapped up as though hearing a call beyond mortal senses. Its siblings cowered as shadows writhed around it, thickening until they seemed to absorb all light. With unnatural speed, it bounded from the den, leaving a trail of darkness in its wake. The mother wolf's mournful howl echoed through the forest, a lament for a child lost to shadow. As the corrupted pup raced through Alfheim, the land itself seemed to recoil. Flowers closed their petals, leaves curled inward, and the very air grew heavy with foreboding. The darkness trailing behind it whispered ancient promises, guiding it toward its dark purpose. The gathering storm. In the mortal realm, shadows lengthened as Trinity's power grew. Each day brought her child closer to birth, while in Alfheim, the corrupted pup carved a path of darkness through the enchanted forest. Throughout the realms, those sensitive to power felt the growing discord, a symphony of shadow building to a crescendo. Draven, still reeling from the loss of the celestial gem, nursed his wounds in secret chambers. His once mighty power had dimmed, but his thirst for revenge burned brighter than ever. In darker corners, whispers spread of Ravina's desperate search for the Void Stone, her actions growing more reckless with each passing day. The balance between realms wavered, light and darkness gathering their forces for the battles to come. The legacy of Ultranacius Eternus pulsed through it all, in Trinity's unborn child, in the corrupted pup, in the trader's tainted aura, and in the hearts of those who sought power at any cost. The war was coming, and its shadow would darken every realm before the end.